Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a really profound reflection by Charles W. Wormy. He's an education management student at Cyprus International University, and his mission is absolutely critical: reducing education disparities in rural Liberia. Just put yourself in those shoes for a second. Imagine waking up in a remote village, walking miles down a dirt road to a building that might not even have a roof, let alone textbooks or, a qualified teacher. It's a massive global challenge. But as we're going to see, his insights offer a total masterclass in systems thinking that goes way, way beyond just one country. Let's dive in.
Now, it's the obvious first thought, right? If kids don't have a place to learn, just build a school. But is fixing rural education really just about bricks and mortar? Yormy's reflection emphatically tells us no way. Think about it. You could build 100 beautiful, brand new schools, but if those buildings are just sitting empty because there's no system to actually deploy teachers to them, or if they lack a curriculum that makes sense to the local community, well, they're just empty shells. True reform requires managing the whole complex system. It's about addressing access, ensuring quality, fighting for equity, and building something sustainable. Because without the management structures to actually run the whole shebang, you really haven't solved the disparity at all.
So, here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, the Rural Education Challenge. 2, theory meets real-world practice. 3, the shift from equality to equity. 4, strategic management in action. And 5, the continuous improvement cycle.
Section 1. The Rural Education Challenge.
Looking through Yormy's eyes as an aspiring education manager, it becomes incredibly clear that the disparities hitting rural Liberia aren't just about a lack of physical stuff. The problem is deeply structural, and it's managerial. We so often get caught up in the tangible things we can see, right? The missing desks, the broken chalkboards. But the real issue? It's the invisible machinery that gets that desk into the room in the first place. To fix a systemic dysfunction like that, you absolutely need strong leadership, coordination, and most importantly, evidence-based decision-making. Because without data guiding your hand, you're really just guessing out there.
I mean, imagine trying to learn when teachers are inefficiently allocated. You might have 3 math teachers assigned to a well-funded urban school, while a rural school hundreds of miles away literally has zero. Zero! Add to that weak monitoring and supervision. Basically, no one is even checking to see if the curriculum is actually being taught. Then, throw in limited infrastructure and learning materials, which obviously compounds the difficulty for both the students and the teachers. And all of this is made infinitely worse by poor data systems for decision-making. Administrators literally don't know where the gaps are. And crucially, there's super low community involvement in school governance, so the people most affected, they have no voice in the solution. It's a recipe for a systemic breakdown. These challenges definitely highlight severe resource constraints, but even more so, they shine a massive spotlight on glaring weaknesses in educational leadership and administration.
Moving on to Section 2, theory meets real-world practice.
Now, it is so easy to look at those massive challenges and feel totally overwhelmed. But this is exactly where heavy academic theories actually step in as vital, practical guidance. It starts with human capital theory. That means treating education not as a sunk cost, but as a strategic national investment to boost the entire country's future productivity. But, on the ground, constructivism tells us that this investment has to connect directly to local languages and lived experiences if it's actually going to resonate with the students. To pull that off, we need social capital theory, bringing the community directly into school governance so they have a real, tangible stake in the outcome. Of course, none of this works without social cognitive theory, which proves that improving teacher competence directly influences student learning outcomes. Then we've got the diffusion of innovations theory. Listen, if we introduce new tech to bridge the gap, it has to be carefully adapted to rural realities. You can't just drop a bunch of tablets into a village that doesn't have electricity, right? And finally, anchoring all of this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is foundational. It tells us learners simply cannot perform well if basic needs, like nutrition and safety, aren't met. You simply cannot teach a hungry child.
Which brings us to Section 3, the shift from equality to equity.
Okay, so the equality approach means providing the exact same resources for all schools, regardless of their context. And hey, it sounds perfectly fair on paper, doesn't it? Just give every school 50 books and 1 new teacher and call it a day. But Yormy argues really forcefully for the equity approach, and this means purposefully providing more support and resources for rural and disadvantaged schools than for urban ones. Now, this is a profound and frankly a pretty difficult managerial shift. Equity is way harder to implement because it requires leaders to actively unbalance their ledgers in favor of those who have been left behind. Think about it. If a rural school starts 5 miles behind the starting line, giving them the exact same pair of running shoes as the urban school doesn't magically make the race fair. Equity-focused planning recognizes that context matters, and it is absolutely essential for true fairness in outcomes.
Up next, Section 4, Strategic Management in Action.
So, what exactly are Yormi's strategic priorities as an aspiring manager? How do we actually take all that theory and make it real? Well, first, you implement that equity-focused planning we just talked about, redirecting funds exactly where the need is greatest. Second, you prioritize effective teacher deployment, motivation, and continuous professional development, because at the end of the day, teachers are the central engine of the whole system's performance. Third, you strengthen parent-teacher associations to build real accountability and trust within the village itself. Fourth, you carefully integrate educational technology. And to be clear, we are not talking about high-speed internet that just doesn't exist out there. We're talking about radio instruction and offline digital tools. Those are absolute game changers when you're dealing with rural constraints. And finally, linking right back to Maslow's hierarchy from earlier, you implement school feeding programs and health support systems as completely non-negotiable components of your education planning. That is how an effective manager actually bridges the gap between the textbook and the real world.
Finally, Section 5, the Continuous Improvement Cycle.
You plan, you organize, you implement. Standard stuff, right? But the true engine of change lives in what happens next: monitoring, evaluating, and improving. This isn't just some static document sitting in a binder on a desk. It is a living, breathing process. Implementing a strategy once just isn't enough. It has to be sustained. Yormi's reflection makes it super clear that the success of this entire cycle depends completely on continuously utilizing real data and deep community feedback to drive the next iteration. Like if you implement a radio instruction program, but the community tells you the broadcast time overlaps with their harvest chores, well, you evaluate that data and you improve the plan. Without evidence and without the community's voice, the whole cycle just breaks down.
I love this quote from Yormi. He says, effective education leadership must integrate theory, policy, and community realities to achieve equitable and sustainable learning outcomes. Look, education management is undeniably a highly technical endeavor. It involves crunching the data, balancing resource allocation, drafting really complex policy. But at its core, it is also a deeply human-centered endeavor. It requires inclusive community engagement, radical empathy, and just a profound understanding of the lived, daily realities of the students you are actually trying to serve.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you to chew on. While Yormi's focus is on the rural realities of Liberia, systems thinking is universal. So how might these equity-focused management principles apply to reducing disparities right in your own community? Because whether it's education, healthcare, or local infrastructure, managing for equity rather than just equality, it kind of changes everything. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it sparks some great ideas for you. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.